The week my corporate firm handed me a cardboard box and a severance package, my landlord taped a neon green eviction notice to my front door. "Rent is rent. I am not running a charity," he sneered, ordering his maintenance crew to drag my belongings into the freezing Chicago hallway. He did not care that I had never missed a single payment in 4 years. He just wanted to flip the unit for double the price. 4 weeks later, he ripped open a certified legal letter from the new management company that just bought his debt. He read my signature at the bottom of the page 3 times before his knees buckled. The Chicago wind cut through my wool coat as I carried my entire career in a single cardboard box. It was 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. The risk management firm I poured 3 years of my life into had just downsized my department. My fingers were numb by the time I reached the 3rd floor of my Logan Square apartment building. I just wanted to drop the box, lock the door, and figure out how to survive the month. I stopped dead in the hallway. A bright green eviction notice was plastered over my peephole. Standing right next to my door was Gregory Harrison. Gregory owned 15 dilapidated properties across the city and treated his tenants like cattle. He wore a cheap polyester suit and a smug grin that made my stomach turn. "What is this?" I asked, dropping my box. The thud echoed down the narrow corridor. "You have 7 days to vacate Sarah," he said, checking his gold-plated watch. I read the notice. It was a predatory loophole. My lease had switched to month yesterday, and he had unilaterally terminated it. "I have paid my rent on the 1st of the month for 4 years," I argued, stepping toward him. "I just lost my job this morning. You cannot do this." Gregory let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Rent is rent. I have a tech guy willing to pay double what you pay. I am not running a charity." He snapped his fingers. The door to my apartment swung open. 2 heavy-set maintenance men walked out carrying my living room chairs. "What are you doing?" I shouted, moving to block their path. "You have to give me 30 days. I will call the police." "Call them?" Gregory taunted, leaning against the drywall. "I play golf with the precinct captain. You will be in a holding cell for trespassing before sunset." He signaled the men to keep moving. They dumped my chairs by the stairwell. One of them dragged a heavy black trash bag filled with my winter coats. The bag snagged on an exposed nail on the doorframe and ripped open, spilling my clothes onto the dirty carpet. Mixed in with my sweaters was a crumpled manila folder. The maintenance man must have used one of Gregory's old office bags to pack my things. I reached down to grab my coat, and my eyes caught the red lettering on the exposed paper. It was a commercial bank letterhead. Even in my panic, my brain processed the financial jargon instantly. Notice of default. Gregory was drowning in commercial debt. My name is Sarah. I am 29 years old, and I analyze financial risks for a living. I know how to spot a sinking ship, and I know how to sink it faster. Before I tell you how I turned a predatory landlord into my own personal employee, tell me where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you love seeing greedy people get exactly what they deserve. I stood in the drafty corridor shivering as the Chicago wind rattled the thin glass of the hallway window. My breath formed small white clouds in the poorly heated stairwell. $2,000. That was the exact amount I needed for a security deposit on a cheap studio down the street. I pulled my phone from my wool coat pocket. My fingers were so numb I could barely unlock the screen. I dialed my mother. She answered on the 4th ring. Through the receiver, I heard the distinct clinking of expensive crystal and the loud, rhythmic hum of power tools. I explained my situation quickly, keeping my voice steady to mask my rising panic. I told her my firm had downsized. I told her my landlord was currently throwing my bed onto the sidewalk. I asked for a temporary loan, just $2,000 to secure a roof over my head. I promised to pay it back with interest the moment I found a new position. A heavy sigh echoed through the speaker. "Sarah, your timing is terrible," my mother said. Her tone carried no maternal warmth. It sounded like a bank manager declining a credit line. "We simply do not have the liquidity right now." I knew exactly where their liquidity went. My parents had spent my entire childhood treating my older sister Jessica like royalty while treating me like an unpaid intern. Jessica never held a job for more than 6 months. She married Jamal, a brilliant orthopedic surgeon, and spent her days curating a flawless artificial life on social media. "What do you mean you do not have it?" I asked, gripping the phone tighter. "You just sold the lake cabin." "We took out a second mortgage on the main house," my mother corrected me, her voice defensive. Jessica is hosting a major charity gala for Jamal's hospital colleagues next month. She needed a $50,000 kitchen renovation. Her in-laws will be there. She needs to maintain her image. You know how important presentation is in their circle. I stared at the peeling wallpaper of my apartment hallway. My mother had just admitted she leveraged her retirement home to buy Italian marble countertops for a daughter who did not even know how to boil water, while her youngest child was about to sleep on a park bench in December. "I am being evicted, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I have nowhere to go tonight." A sudden scuffle echoed over the speaker. Jessica snatched the receiver from our mother. Her voice dripped with condescension. "Did I hear you whining about money again?" Jessica mocked. I could picture her smug smile through the cellular connection. "I always told you that fancy finance degree was a waste of time. Look where all those late nights studying got you, jobless and begging." "Jessica, put Mom back on the phone," I demanded. "Mom is busy signing invoices for my new Sub-Zero refrigerator." Jessica laughed. "Stop dragging everyone down with your failures, Sarah. You are 29 years old. Grow up, fend for yourself, and stop trying to leech off Mom and Dad. They have done enough for you." The call disconnected. A flat, mechanical tone buzzed against my ear. I lowered the phone. My own family had just sentenced me to the streets so my sister could impress a room full of strangers. I looked at the pile of my belongings scattered across the dirty carpet. My mattress leaned against the trash chute. My winter boots were tossed in a corner. I checked my banking app. $312. Not enough for a hotel. Not enough for a storage unit. I looked down at the crumpled manila folder I had pulled from the torn trash bag. The commercial bank letterhead stared back at me. Notice of default. Gregory Harrison was not evicting me because a tech worker wanted to pay double. He was evicting me to artificially inflate his rent roll on paper, trying to trick a new lender into refinancing his toxic debt. I spent 3 years analyzing fraudulent commercial loans for corporate clients. I recognized a sinking ship instantly. I picked up the folder. I marched past the maintenance men and headed straight for the ground floor leasing office. I kicked the door open without knocking. Gregory was sitting behind his cheap laminate desk, counting a stack of cash. He looked up, his arrogant smile returning. "Forgot your keys," he taunted. "I told you you have 7 days, but if you want to leave tonight, I will not stop you. You owe $12 million to First National Commercial," I said. I threw his default notice onto his desk. Gregory stopped counting. His smug expression vanished. The color drained from his face as he stared at the red ink on the page. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, standing up. He reached for the paper, but I snatched it back. "You were careless with your trash," I said, keeping my voice dead flat. "You are 90 days past due. The bank is preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings on this building and 14 others in your portfolio. You are not flipping my unit. You are desperately trying to show high-yield occupancy to secure a bailout loan." Gregory stepped out from behind his desk. He towered over me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "Give me that file, Sarah. You do not know what you are talking about. You are a broke tenant who cannot even afford rent. I am a financial risk analyst," I corrected him. "Or I was until this morning. I know exactly what I am looking at. If I send a copy of this notice to the City Housing Authority, they will freeze your operating licenses. If I send it to your current tenants, they will launch a rent strike. You will be bankrupt before Friday." Gregory clenched his fists. He glanced at the door, making sure his maintenance men were not around. "What do you want?" he hissed. "I keep my apartment," I said, "rent-free, and you put my furniture back exactly where you found it." Gregory laughed, a harsh, desperate sound that echoed in the cramped office. "You think you can blackmail me for free rent? I will drag you out of here by your hair. Do it!" I challenged, stepping closer instead of backing away. "Lay a hand on me. See how fast the police uncover your fraudulent accounting when they investigate the assault." He glared at me, his chest heaving. He knew I had him cornered. But men like Gregory never surrender without extracting a price. His eyes narrowed as a new, darker calculation crossed his mind. "Fine," Gregory said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You want to stay rent-free? You are going to earn it. You say you are a financial analyst. Prove it." He walked over to a rusted metal filing cabinet in the corner of his office. He unlocked it and pulled out 3 thick binders overflowing with receipts, bank statements, and tax notices. He dumped the heavy binders onto the desk between us. Dust puffed into the air. "My books are a mess." Gregory admitted, his eyes locking onto mine. The IRS has been asking questions about my tax deductions. The banks want audited financials by the end of the month before they even consider a new loan. I need a second set of books created, a clean set. Something that hides the deferred maintenance, obscures the lead paint liabilities, and inflates the net operating income. You are going to do it for me. I stared at the binders. He was asking me to commit federal financial fraud. He was asking me to risk a prison sentence to keep a roof over my head. You want me to cook your books? I asked. I want you to fix my problem, he countered. You do this for me, you get to keep your warm little apartment. You get your furniture back. You get a roof over your head while you look for a new job. But if you make one mistake, if one number looks suspicious to the bank, I will not just evict you, I will ruin you. I looked at the stack of fraudulent documents. I looked at the man who had just tried to throw me into the freezing Chicago streets. I thought about my family drinking champagne in a $50,000 kitchen paid for with borrowed money while telling me to fend for myself. I reached out and pulled the first binder toward me. I need a dedicated workspace, I said, and I need access to all your bank statements. Do not hide a single transaction from me. Gregory smirked, thinking he had just recruited a desperate accomplice. He had no idea. He had just handed the architect of his destruction the blueprints to his entire empire. The cold air of the sub-basement clung to my skin like a wet sheet. Gregory did not give me a corner office or a quiet desk in his leasing center. He marched me down a narrow, unlit stairwell into the boiler room of the Logan Square building. The space smelled of stagnant water and diesel fuel. A single fluorescent bulb flickered overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow over a rusted metal table. Beside the table sat 5 heavy cardboard banker boxes filled to the brim with loose receipts, unfiled tax notices, and bank statements. My 2 maintenance guys dropped your apartment keys on the kitchen counter, Gregory said, kicking one of the heavy boxes with the toe of his leather shoe. You get to sleep in your own bed tonight, but down here you work for me. I pulled out the metal folding chair and sat down. The concrete floor radiated a biting chill that seeped right through the soles of my boots. Gregory leaned over the desk, planting both his palms flat on the rusted surface. He invaded my personal space. His breath smelled of stale cigars and cheap peppermint. He locked his dark eyes onto mine. Let us get one thing straight, Sarah. You are going to build me a flawless set of financials. I need a trailing 12-month profit and loss statement that shows a healthy, thriving property portfolio. You will bury the deferred maintenance costs. You will inflate the gross potential rent. You will make these slums look like luxury investments on paper. I stared back at him, refusing to blink or look away. And if the bank audits the numbers I asked, Gregory smiled a thin, predatory smile. They will not audit them if they look legitimate. That is why I kept you around. You know what underwriters want to see. Feed them the right metrics. But hear me clearly. If you make one wrong calculation, if you trigger a single red flag with the lenders, our deal is dead. I will not just throw you out into the snow. I will call my friends at the precinct and have you charged with embezzlement. You will be a convicted felon before the weekend. Do you understand? I understand, I said quietly. Gregory tapped the desk twice, satisfied with his threat. He turned and walked up the concrete stairs. The heavy steel fire door slammed shut behind him. The deadbolt engaged with a loud metallic clank. He had locked me in. I opened my laptop and connected to the weak building Wi-Fi network. I reached into the first banker box and pulled out a stack of crumpled papers. I spent the next 6 hours doing what I do best. I followed the money. At my old corporate firm, I analyzed the risk profiles of Fortune 500 companies. I knew how to dig through layers of financial obfuscation to find the rotting core of a business. Gregory thought his accounting was just messy. He was wrong. His accounting was a sprawling, deliberate crime scene. As I digitized the receipts and cross-referenced them with the bank statements, a horrifying web of deceit began to untangle on my screen. Gregory was not just a bad landlord. He was running a sophisticated racket. He owned 15 residential buildings across Chicago, all held under different shell companies registered in Delaware. He was siphoning the rental income from low-income tenants straight into his personal offshore accounts. The tax evasion alone was enough to put him in federal prison for a decade. He claimed over $3 million in capital expenditures over the past 2 years. According to his tax filings, he had replaced the roofs, upgraded the plumbing, and performed extensive lead paint remediation across all 15 properties. I looked around the damp, mold-infested basement. I thought about the families living upstairs with leaking ceilings and faulty heaters. He had not spent a single dime on remediation. He had pocketed the repair loans and written them off as business losses to dodge the IRS. But the tax fraud was only a fraction of his problem. I opened the commercial loan documents and my heart skipped a beat. Gregory had cross-collateralized his entire portfolio. He used the equity from the Logan Square building to finance a property in South Shore, then used that property to buy a complex in Hyde Park. It was a fragile house of cards built on toxic debt. The master loan with First National Commercial Bank was for $12 million. I checked the amortization schedule. The loan was structured with a balloon payment, meaning the entire principal balance was due in 30 days. Gregory did not have $12 million. His operating accounts were overdrawn. He was bleeding cash to maintain his luxury lifestyle, funding sports cars and golf club memberships while his properties crumbled. The bank had already issued the notice of default. They were giving him a brief grace period to refinance the debt before they initiated full foreclosure proceedings. If First National Commercial foreclosed, they would seize all 15 buildings. Gregory would lose his entire empire. That was why he needed me. He was trying to secure a bridge loan from a high-risk shadow lender to pay off First National Commercial. To get that new loan, he needed pristine financial statements showing a high debt service coverage ratio. He wanted me to fabricate the income so he could steal another $12 million from a new lender, extract a hefty management fee for himself, and eventually let the properties go bankrupt anyway. He was turning me into an accessory to federal wire fraud. I sat back in the cold metal chair. The sheer audacity of his greed was staggering. He was willing to risk my freedom just to buy himself a few more months of pretending to be a real estate mogul. I looked at the glowing spreadsheet on my laptop screen. Gregory thought he had me backed into a corner. He thought my desperation made me a compliant victim. He failed to realize that by handing me the raw, unfiltered data of his criminal enterprise, he had just handed me a loaded weapon. A radical, dangerous plan started to take root in my mind. First National Commercial Bank did not want to manage 15 dilapidated apartment buildings. Banks hate owning real estate. When a borrower defaults, a bank will often sell the toxic debt to a private equity firm at a steep discount just to clear the bad loan off their balance sheet. If a ruthless investment firm bought Gregory's debt, they would not negotiate with him. They would foreclose, immediately bypass the grace period, and take ownership of the entire portfolio. I knew exactly how those transactions worked. I used to advise the firms that bought that exact kind of distressed debt. I opened a new encrypted folder on my hard drive. I began creating 2 separate sets of books. The first set was the fantasy Gregory demanded. I smoothed out the rough edges, inflated the rental yields, and erased the phantom expenses. It was a beautiful, fraudulent masterpiece designed to keep him pacified. The second set of books was the unvarnished, brutal truth. I compiled every instance of tax evasion, every fraudulent deduction, and every transferred dollar. I built a comprehensive financial dossier that mapped out exactly how vulnerable his empire was. My fingers flew across the keyboard. The biting chill of the basement no longer bothered me. The humiliation of being dragged out of my apartment faded, replaced by a sharp clinical focus. Gregory wanted to use my skills to save his sinking ship. Instead, I was going to use his own numbers to orchestrate a hostile takeover. I was going to find a buyer for his debt. I was going to broker the sale of his own buildings right out from under him. I just needed the right buyer and a small amount of startup capital to get myself back into the corporate rooms where those deals were made. My phone vibrated against the rusted desk, breaking my concentration. I glanced at the screen. It was a calendar reminder. I had a housewarming dinner to attend at my sister Jessica's new luxury home this weekend, the same sister who had mocked my unemployment and denied me a simple loan. I stared at the reminder, my jaw tightening. I was broke, exhausted, and technically facing potential accessory charges if Gregory's scheme collapsed too soon. Going to a dinner party filled with wealthy, judgmental socialites was the last thing I wanted to do. But I needed seed money to execute my plan against Gregory, and Jessica's wealthy husband was my only remaining connection to high society. I closed the laptop and packed the physical receipts back into the banker boxes. I had a lot of work to do and very little time to do it. The trap was set. Gregory was standing right on the trap door. Now I just needed to find the capital to pull the lever. The rideshare dropped me off at the end of a sweeping circular driveway in Winnetka. The northern Chicago suburbs felt like a different planet compared to the gritty streets of Logan Square. Jessica and Jamal had recently purchased a 6-bedroom colonial stone estate that screamed generational wealth. The front lawn featured manicured hedges and a lit stone fountain water flowing freely, despite the freezing temperatures. I stood on the pavement in the same gray wool coat I had worn during my eviction. The fabric was pilled at the elbows. My boots carried the gray salt and dirty slush of the city streets. I walked up the heated stone steps and pressed the heavy brass doorbell. My mother opened the door. She wore a tailored silk blouse and held a crystal champagne flute. The rehearsed smile she reserved for wealthy company dropped the second she recognized my face. She grabbed my forearm and pulled me into the foyer, swiftly closing the heavy mahogany door to keep me out of sight of the main living room. "You wore that," my mother hissed. Her eyes scanned my scuffed boots and tired posture with undisguised distaste. "Jessica has senior colleagues from Northwestern Memorial Hospital in the dining room. You look like you just crawled out of a homeless shelter." My father appeared behind her, adjusting his silk tie. He held a glass of expensive scotch. "Sarah, your sister worked hard to put this evening together," he muttered, keeping his voice low to avoid being overheard. "The least you could do is make an effort. Go to the powder room and fix your hair. You are tracking snow on the imported tile." I looked at the two people who brought me into the world. They stood in a foyer lined with imported Italian marble. I knew exactly how that marble was funded. They had taken out a second mortgage on their retirement home to pay for it. They were drowning in high-interest debt to fund my sister's delusions of grandeur, yet they looked at me with pure disgust. I did not argue. I walked past them, my posture straight. I analyzed their behavior the same way I analyzed toxic corporate assets. They were liabilities. They offered zero return on investment. The dining room glowed under a tiered crystal chandelier. A catered buffet lined the far wall featuring prime rib and imported seafood. Waiters in black vests circulated with silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. Jessica held court at the head of the long dining table. She wore a designer cocktail dress and laughed loudly at a joke made by a hospital administrator. I took a seat at the far end of the table, keeping my head down. I ate quietly, running the numbers of Gregory's fraudulent commercial loans in my head. I was planning my next move against my landlord, calculating interest rates and default penalties. But Jessica could never tolerate a room where she was not the absolute center of attention. My quiet demeanor made an easy target. "Sarah," Jessica called out. Her voice cut through the ambient chatter like a blade. The clinking of silverware stopped. A dozen well-dressed guests turned to look at me. "I heard your firm finally let you go," Jessica said. A cruel smirk played on her lips. She swirled her red wine. "I always told you finance was a dead end. Jamal and I were just talking about how important it is to have a real career, like medicine or public relations." A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. My mother offered a tight, nervous laugh to break the tension, actively enabling the humiliation. I kept my face neutral. I refused to give my sister the emotional reaction she craved. "I am exploring new opportunities," I said flatly. Jessica scoffed, leaning forward and resting her elbows on the mahogany table. "Well, make sure you ask the caterers for some plastic containers before you leave. Let my sister pack up the leftover prime rib, everyone. She is going through a poor phase right now and cannot afford her own groceries. We have to do our part for the less fortunate." The room went dead silent. The humiliation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My father stared at his plate, refusing to intervene. My mother took a sip of her champagne, actively ignoring the cruelty her eldest daughter just unleashed. I felt the heat rise in my chest. My training took over. I breathed in. I did not shout. I did not throw my drink. I simply picked up my cloth napkin, wiped my mouth, and stood up from the table. "Thank you for the dinner," I said to the room. I walked out of the dining room with steady, measured steps. I retreated to the empty hallway, heading straight for the front door. I needed to get back to the basement in Logan Square. I needed to finish destroying Gregory. "Sarah, wait." I turned. Jamal was walking quickly down the corridor. At 34, Jamal was a highly respected orthopedic surgeon. He was a tall, broad-shouldered African-American man who carried the perpetual exhaustion of someone who spent 12 hours a day in an operating room. He possessed a quiet, grounded integrity that stood in stark contrast to my sister's superficial vanity. He did not come from money. He built his career on grueling shifts and federal student loans. Jamal did not know about the $50,000 kitchen renovation my parents funded. Jessica kept her financial manipulations hidden from him. She painted a picture of independent wealth that Jamal was too busy saving lives to question. He thought my parents were simply generous. He had no idea they were leveraging their future to buy his wife's social status. He gestured toward his private study. I followed him inside. He closed the heavy oak door, shutting out the noise of the party and the faint sound of Jessica's laughter. The room smelled of old paper and leather bindings. Jamal walked over to his desk. He looked at me, his dark eyes filled with genuine concern. "I am sorry about what Jessica said out there," Jamal said, his voice low and steady. "She has a way of letting the audience get to her head. It was out of line. I will speak to her about it." "It is fine, Jamal," I replied, staring at the polished floorboards. "I am used to it. She has always needed someone to look down on." "It is not fine," he countered. He opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a thick white envelope. He walked back over and pressed it into my hand. "What is this?" I asked, feeling the weight of the paper. "I know you lost your job," Jamal said, keeping his tone even and respectful. "I also know your pride will not let you ask for help. But everyone hits a rough patch. This is just to keep you afloat until you find your next position. Chicago is unforgiving in the winter." I opened the envelope flap. A stack of crisp $100 bills sat inside. The green ink stared back at me. "It is $5,000, Jamal said before I could count it. "Do not worry about paying me back right away. Just get a warm place to stay and get back on your feet." I looked at the money. $5,000. It was more than enough for a security deposit on a new apartment. It was enough to escape Gregory and his mold-infested basement. But my mind was already racing past rent. $5,000 was a tailored designer suit. It was a week in a high-end business-class hotel. It was the entry fee I needed to walk into a private equity firm and look like I belonged at the negotiating table. This was not rent money. This was war capital. "Jamal." "I cannot take this," I said, my voice catching slightly. "You work too hard for your money." He placed his hands on my shoulders. "Yes, you can. You are family, Sarah. We take care of each other. Just do me one favor." "Anything," I replied. "Do not tell Jessica about the money," Jamal said. A flicker of weariness crossed his face, a silent acknowledgement of the strain in his own marriage. "She worries about finances, and I do not want to start an argument tonight. Let this be between us." He had no idea his wife was actively draining my parents' retirement accounts to fund the very party happening outside that door. He had no idea he was married to a financial parasite. But tonight was not the night to shatter his reality. My priority was Gregory. I needed to secure my base of operations before I dismantled my family's toxic dynamics. I gripped the envelope tightly, feeling the sharp edges of the bills through the paper. "Thank you, Jamal. You have no idea what this means to me. This changes everything." He offered a warm, tired smile. "Go build your empire, Sarah. Prove them wrong." I left the study and slipped out the front door into the freezing night. I did not call a rideshare. I walked down the long driveway, the snow crunching beneath my worn boots. The cold wind bit at my face, but I did not feel it. The humiliation of the dinner table faded into nothing, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. My parents thought they had broken me. My sister thought she had secured her position at the top of the hierarchy. My landlord thought he owned me. They all underestimated the danger of handing a desperate analyst the exact leverage she needed. I clutched the $5,000 in my pocket. The game had just shifted. I had the data to ruin a real estate mogul, and now I had the capital to dress the part. Tomorrow morning I was going to war. I returned to Logan Square just past midnight. The heating in the building had failed again, and the lobby was as freezing as the street outside. I bypassed my apartment entirely and headed straight for the basement. I had 2 days' worth of fake ledger entries to finish before Gregory's self-imposed deadline. Jamal's $5,000 sat safely inside my inner coat pocket. The capital I needed to broker the hostile takeover was secure. Now I just needed to maintain the illusion of compliance until Monday morning. I unlocked the heavy fire door to the boiler room. The sickening smell of diesel fuel and mold immediately assaulted my senses. The fluorescent bulb flickered, buzzing with a low, erratic hum. I froze. Gregory Harrison was already down there. He sat in my metal folding chair, his cheap polyester suit contrasting with the grime of the basement. He held a thick stack of printed financial reports in his hands. These were the finalized fraudulent documents I had spent the last 48 hours crafting. They showed a booming real estate portfolio, burying $3 million of missing capital and hiding $12 million in toxic debt. "You do excellent work," Sarah Gregory said. He did not look up from the papers. His voice echoed off the damp concrete walls. "The debt service coverage ratio looks pristine. Any underwriter at a shadow bank will take one look at this and approve my bridge loan by Tuesday." I stood near the stairwell, keeping a safe distance. "I am glad it meets your expectations. The fake books are complete. The deal is done. You get your loan, I keep my apartment." Gregory chuckled, a low, vibrating sound that carried no humor. He stood up, dropping the thick stack of papers onto the rusted metal desk. He pulled a silver pen from his breast pocket and tossed it on top of the pile. "Not quite done," he said, smoothing his tie. "The lenders require a verified signature from a certified financial professional to validate these internal audits. They need to know the numbers were compiled by someone with a corporate background. Someone like you." I stared at the pen. He was not just asking me to create the fake documents. He was demanding that I legally attach my name to them. "I am not signing those," I stated flatly. My voice did not shake. Gregory's smug expression vanished. The arrogant landlord facade dropped, revealing the desperate, cornered criminal underneath. He took a slow, menacing step toward me. "You are going to sign them," he growled. "You are going to sign every single page. You think you can walk away now. You are an accessory. You built the lie. Now you are going to own it." Creating internal projections is one thing. Putting my signature on a fraudulent loan application intended for federal tax filings and commercial underwriting is wire fraud. It is a felony. I am not going to prison so you can keep driving a Porsche while your buildings rot. Gregory crossed the distance between us in 3 long strides. He grabbed my laptop from the desk. Before I could react, he lifted it high above his head and slammed it down onto the concrete floor. The sound of shattering plastic and cracking glass cracked like a gunshot in the confined space. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my training held my panic at bay. I did not scream. I did not flinch. I calculated the variables. The laptop was destroyed, but the encrypted cloud backup had synced an hour before I left for Jessica's dinner. The data was safe. Gregory was just breaking plastic. "Sign the papers," Sarah Gregory roared, kicking the shattered remains of my laptop across the floor. "You think you have leverage? You have nothing. You are a broke, unemployed tenant living in my building. You sign those papers right now, or I make one phone call and you are sleeping on the street tonight. You cannot legally evict me without 30 days' notice," I countered, maintaining eye contact. "A judge will throw out your case." Gregory laughed, a manic, breathless sound. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket. "A judge. You think this goes to a judge? I play golf with the precinct captain. I pay for his kids' private school tuition. I do not need a court order. I just need to tell him a disgruntled former tenant is trespassing in my basement and threatening me. He will send a cruiser to drag you out of here in handcuffs." He dialed a number and put the phone to his ear. He never took his eyes off me. "Hey, Jimmy. It is Greg. Yeah, down at the Logan Square property. I have a squatter refusing to leave, causing a disturbance. Send a patrol car. 10 minutes. "Perfect." He hung up the phone and shoved it back into his pocket. "You have 10 minutes to sign those documents. If you do not, the cops show up. They will not ask questions. They will throw you and your belongings into the snow. You will be arrested for trespassing. Good luck getting a job in finance with an arrest record." I looked at the stack of fraudulent papers on the desk. I looked at the shattered remains of my laptop. I felt the thick envelope of cash resting against my ribs. Jamal's $5,000 was my ticket out of this basement, out of this entire rigged game. Gregory thought he was backing me into a corner. He was actually giving me the exact exit velocity I needed. I stepped up to the desk. I picked up the silver pen. Gregory smirked, crossing his arms over his chest, believing he had broken my resistance. I took the pen, looked him dead in the eye, and snapped it in half. Ink splattered across the fraudulent document, staining the pristine white paper with dark, unreadable blotches. I dropped the broken plastic pieces onto the desk. I am not signing your death warrant, Gregory. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He lunged forward, grabbing my upper arm with a bruising grip. I did not scream. I wrenched my arm free with a sharp, practiced twist. "Do not touch me," I warned, my voice dropping to a lethal calm. The heavy steel fire door at the top of the stairs banged open. Heavy boots clattered down the concrete steps. 2 uniformed Chicago police officers walked into the basement. They did not look at Gregory with suspicion. They looked at him with familiarity. The corruption was palpable in the air, thicker than the diesel fumes. "Officers, this woman is trespassing," Gregory stated quickly, smoothing his jacket and playing the role of the aggrieved property owner. "She was evicted yesterday. She broke into the basement and started destroying my office equipment." The older officer, a man with a thick mustache and a tired expression, did not ask for my ID. He did not ask for a copy of the lease or the eviction notice. He simply unclipped his handcuffs and stepped toward me. "Miss, you need to vacate the premises immediately," the officer commanded. "Grab your things. You are leaving. Now." "I have tenant rights," I stated clearly, making sure my voice carried. "This is an illegal eviction." The officer grabbed my elbow. "We can discuss housing court from the sidewalk. Move." They did not let me go upstairs to pack a bag. They did not let me grab a toothbrush. They marched me up the stairs through the freezing lobby and shoved me out the front doors of the building. The biting Chicago wind hit me instantly, freezing the sweat on my neck. Gregory stood in the doorway. The 2 officers flanked him like personal bodyguards. He pulled a heavy ring of keys from his pocket. He locked the glass double doors, engaging the deadbolt with a loud final click. He looked at me through the glass. He offered a slow, victorious smile. He mouthed the words, "I win." He turned his back and walked away, secure in his corrupted little empire. I stood on the snowy pavement. The streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across the slush-covered road. A normal person would have cried. A normal person would have pounded on the glass, begging for their clothes, begging for mercy. I did not beg. I reached into the deep pocket of my wool coat. My fingers brushed past the envelope of Jamal's cash and curled around a small metal object. I pulled it out. It was a black encrypted USB drive. Before I left for Jessica's dinner party, I had downloaded the second set of books, the real books. I had every tax return he forged. I had the bank statements proving he siphoned the repair loans to offshore accounts. Most importantly, I had the commercial loan documents outlining the $12 million balloon payment and the notice of default from First National Commercial Bank. I held the USB drive up to the streetlight, watching the metal catch the glare. The cold no longer registered. The humiliation of being escorted out by corrupt police evaporated. Gregory thought he had just thrown a helpless tenant onto the street. He had no idea he had just evicted the weapon that would dismantle his life. I smiled, a sharp, cold expression that mirrored the freezing wind. "You just dug your own grave, Gregory," I whispered to the empty street. I turned my back on the building. I had $5,000 in my pocket and the financial blueprint to a $12 million real estate portfolio. I needed to buy a suit. I needed to book a hotel room. Because at 9 o'clock on Monday morning, I was going to walk into a private equity firm and sell Gregory Harrison's entire life to the highest bidder. I did not sleep that night. I checked into a mid-tier business hotel in the Loop, using Jamal's cash to secure a room under a fake corporate alias. The hot shower washed away the smell of the basement diesel and the freezing chill of the street, but it did not touch the cold resolve settling in my chest. At 7 in the morning, I stood inside a high-end boutique on Michigan Avenue. I spent $1,200 on a tailored charcoal gray suit. I bought crisp white blouse leather heels that clicked with authority and a structured leather briefcase. When I looked in the mirror, the desperate evicted tenant was gone. The woman staring back was a financial assassin, armed and ready. By 8:45, I was walking through the revolving glass doors of First National Commercial Bank. This was the institution holding the toxic $12 million note on Gregory's properties. It was a regional powerhouse, all polished marble floors and hushed, expensive silence. I bypassed the teller line and walked directly toward the glass-walled executive suites. A heavy-set security guard stepped into my path, holding up a broad hand. "Ma'am, this area is for scheduled appointments only," he said, his tone polite but unyielding. I did not stop. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes fixed on the corner office. I need to see Arthur Vance, the Director of Commercial Lending. It concerns the imminent default of the Harrison Holdings portfolio. The guard grabbed my upper arm. I said appointments only. You need to leave before I call for backup. I wrenched my arm free with a sharp jerk. I raised my voice, pitching it to cut through the quiet hum of the lobby, ensuring it carried directly to the glass walls of the executive suites. Arthur Vance, I projected clear and authoritative. You are carrying $12 million of non-performing debt, cross-collateralized across 15 rotting residential properties under Harrison Holdings. Your borrower is moving liquidity offshore and preparing to file Chapter 11 bankruptcy by Friday. When he files, this bank is going to take a total write-down, and your quarterly earnings report will sink your department. The lobby went dead silent. Tellers stopped counting cash. Customers turned their heads. The security guard reached for his radio. The heavy glass door of the corner office swung open. A tall man in a bespoke navy suit stepped out. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, but his eyes were sharp and furious. He glared at me, then signaled the guard to stand down. "My office now," Arthur Vance commanded. I smoothed my jacket and walked past the guard. I entered the expansive office and took a seat across from his massive mahogany desk before he even offered it. I placed my leather briefcase on the table and folded my hands. "Who are you?" Vance demanded, closing the door and locking it. "And how do you have internal data regarding our commercial loan portfolio?" "My name is Sarah Jenkins. I am a risk analyst. I specialize in distressed asset liquidation." I lied smoothly, adopting the persona I had just purchased. "I know your borrower, Gregory Harrison. I know he missed his balloon payment 30 days ago. I know you issued a notice of default." Vance sat down heavily, his aggressive posture cracking slightly. "That information is highly confidential. If you are trying to blackmail this institution, I am not blackmailing you, Arthur. I am offering you a lifeline." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I had printed a summarized breakdown of Gregory's true financial state using the hotel business center. I slid the paper across the desk. "Gregory is running a shell game," I explained, keeping my voice clinical and detached. "He has inflated his rent rolls and faked his capital expenditures. The properties are structurally compromised. If you initiate standard foreclosure, he will tie you up in bankruptcy court for 3 years. By the time you take possession of the buildings, the deferred maintenance will have eaten away the underlying asset value. You will sell the portfolio at auction for pennies on the dollar. You will lose millions." Vance reviewed the numbers. He was a veteran banker. It took him less than 30 seconds to recognize the reality of the disaster staring back at him. He set the paper down and rubbed his temples. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice dropping the aggressive edge. "Because I have a buyer," I said. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on his desk. "Banks do not want to manage slum properties. You are not property managers. You want clean balance sheets. I have connections with a private equity firm that specializes in aggressive hostile takeovers of distressed assets. They have the capital to buy the Harrison Holdings note directly from your bank today." Vance looked up, his eyes narrowing in calculation. "They want to buy the non-performing debt." "Exactly," I confirmed. "You sell the debt to my buyers at a modest discount. You get the toxic asset off your books before the end of the quarter. You avoid the lengthy foreclosure process, and you avoid the public embarrassment of underwriting a massive fraud. My buyers take over the paper and they deal with Gregory Harrison themselves. If they buy the debt, they become the new lender," Vance reasoned out loud, tapping his pen against the mahogany wood. "And since Harrison is already in default, the new owner of the debt can bypass the grace period and execute an immediate non-judicial foreclosure. They can seize the entire portfolio without going through bankruptcy court. They can take everything he owns by the end of the week," I agreed. A cold, sharp satisfaction spiked in my chest. Vance studied me for a long moment. "You are brokering the sale of your own client's debt to a predator fund to facilitate a hostile takeover. Gregory Harrison is not my client," I corrected him. My voice held zero emotion. "He is an obstacle, and I am removing him." Vance did not care about the ethics of the situation. He cared about his quarterly bonus and protecting his bank from a massive write-down. The logic was undeniable. The numbers made sense. I was offering him a clean exit from a catastrophic underwriting failure. "Who is the buyer?" Vance asked, pulling a notepad toward him. "Capital Vertex," I stated. Vance's eyebrows raised slightly. Capital Vertex was known in the Chicago financial district for their ruthless acquisition strategies. They were apex predators in the commercial real estate sector. "I need a letter of intent from Capital Vertex by 3 o'clock this afternoon," Vance said, his tone shifting into pure business mode. "If they agree to purchase the Harrison debt at 90 cents on the dollar, I will push the sale through the risk committee by tomorrow morning. You will have the LOI on your desk by 2, I promised." I stood up, retrieved my briefcase, and walked out of the office. The security guard watched me leave with a confused expression. I did not look back. I stepped out onto the bustling Chicago street. The morning sun glared off the skyscrapers, blinding and cold. I had just successfully negotiated the sale of 15 apartment buildings, including the one I had been violently evicted from less than 24 hours ago. I checked my phone. It was 9:30. I had the bank's agreement to sell the debt. Now I just needed the private equity firm to actually buy it. I hailed a taxi. Capital Vertex was located across town. The stakes were impossibly high. I was about to walk into the headquarters of a multi-billion-dollar investment fund and pitch a hostile takeover using stolen financial data. But the risk did not paralyze me. It fueled me. Capital Vertex was not just any private equity firm. They were the exact firm that had laid me off last Tuesday. I was going back to the executives who deemed me expendable, and I was going to make them an offer they could not refuse. I was not just going to destroy my landlord. I was going to force my former employer to finance the execution. The elevator doors chimed softly as I stepped onto the 40th floor of the Capital Vertex Tower. The air up here smelled of expensive espresso and cold ambition. 7 days ago, I had walked out of these exact glass doors, carrying a cardboard box, escorted by a sympathetic human resources representative. They had terminated my contract to satisfy a quarterly budget cut. They deemed my role expendable. As my leather heels clicked against the polished Italian marble floor, I felt no fear. The woman they fired was a compliant corporate drone. The woman returning today was a predator. I approached the main reception desk. The administrative assistant, a young woman named Emily, looked up from her dual monitors. Her polite customer service smile faltered the second she recognized my face. "Sarah," she stammered, standing up quickly. "You cannot be up here. Your security clearance was revoked last week. I am going to have to call the guards." "Call them if you want, Emily," I said, keeping my pace steady as I walked right past her desk. "But you might want to tell Donovan Hayes that I am holding a $12 million acquisition in my briefcase before you let them drag me out." I did not wait for her response. I marched straight down the executive corridor. The glass walls of the various offices offered clear views of junior analysts and portfolio managers typing frantically at their keyboards. A week ago, I was one of them, grinding through 60-hour weeks for a fraction of the profits I generated. I reached the main boardroom at the end of the hall. Through the transparent partition, I saw Donovan Hayes. He was the chief executive officer of Capital Vertex, a man known for gutting struggling tech startups and liquidating their assets for staggering returns. He was sitting at the head of a long granite table flanked by 3 senior managing directors. I pushed the heavy glass door open without knocking. The ambient hum of the ventilation system was the only sound in the room as 4 men turned to stare at me in sheer disbelief. Sarah Donovan said, his voice laced with annoyance and corporate boredom, "We processed your severance package. This is a restricted floor. You are trespassing. Cancel the security team," Donovan Y. commanded, walking directly to the opposite end of the granite table. I set my new leather briefcase down with a solid thud. "I am not here to beg for my old job back. I am here to hand you a hostile takeover with a projected 40% return on investment." The senior managing director to his left scoffed, rolling his eyes at my audacity. Donovan raised a hand, silencing his subordinate. Donovan was a shark, and sharks always recognize the scent of blood in the water. He leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, studying my tailored charcoal suit and my unwavering posture. "You have exactly 3 minutes to convince me not to have you arrested for corporate espionage, Sarah." Donovan warned, his eyes narrowing in cold calculation. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the black encrypted USB drive. I tossed it across the smooth length of the table. It slid and stopped mere inches from Donovan's resting hands. "On that drive is the complete unredacted financial architecture of Harrison Holdings," I explained, my voice echoing clearly in the pristine boardroom. It contains the real ledgers for 15 residential apartment complexes located in prime, rapidly gentrifying Chicago neighborhoods. The owner is a slumlord named Gregory Harrison. He is running a sophisticated shell game. He falsified capital expenditures to the IRS, siphoned property repair loans into offshore accounts, and cross-collateralized his entire portfolio to the breaking point. A second managing director frowned, leaning forward. Slum properties are a liability. We are a venture capital firm, not property managers. We do not deal with peeling paint-broken heaters and housing court disputes. You will not have to deal with any of that, I countered smoothly, shifting my gaze to lock onto the skeptical director. Gregory missed a $12 million balloon payment 30 days ago. First National Commercial Bank holds the paper. They issued a formal notice of default this morning. The bank is staring down a catastrophic write-down for underwriting a fraudster, and their lending director is currently in a state of panic. Donovan sat forward, intertwining his fingers on the table. The boredom completely vanished from his demeanor, replaced by sharp, predatory interest. "You spoke directly with the commercial bank today?" he asked. "I sat in the private office of their commercial lending director less than 2 hours ago," I replied, projecting absolute certainty. "He is terrified of the upcoming quarterly earnings report. I convinced him that initiating a standard foreclosure will drag the bank through years of expensive bankruptcy litigation while the physical assets rot into worthlessness. I offered him a clean, immediate exit. He is willing to sell the toxic debt to a private equity firm this afternoon at 90 cents on the dollar." Donovan looked down at the black USB drive, then back up to my face. His mind was already running the aggressive legal maneuvers required to execute the play. If we buy the non-performing debt, we legally become the new lender. Because the borrower is already in severe default, we bypass the standard grace period entirely. We can execute a swift non-judicial foreclosure and seize the deed to the entire portfolio by Friday. Exactly. I confirmed, stepping into the trap I had carefully laid out. We strip the assets from the holding company, evict the fraudster from his own empire, stabilize the properties, and liquidate the newly acquired portfolio to real estate developers for a staggering profit. The gentrification value alone guarantees a minimum 40% yield within 12 months. Donovan offered a slow, chilling smile. It was a reptilian expression that signaled his intent to consume the deal and discard me. He reached out and picked up the USB drive. "This is exceptional scouting work, Sarah. We will take the reins from here. We will ensure Human Resources issues you a generous finder fee for bringing this to our attention." I placed my hand firmly on the table, leaning my weight forward. "I am not a Scout Donovan," I said, dropping my voice to a lethal, unyielding whisper. "And I am not handing you a charitable deal. I am offering you a partnership." The room fell into a suffocating silence. The three managing directors stared at me as if I had just lost my grip on reality. "You want to partner with the firm that fired you 7 days ago?" Donovan asked. His amusement twisted into sharp irritation. "You were a mid-level risk analyst making a basic salary. You have zero capital to invest. You have zero leverage in this room." "I have the decryption key to that drive stored solely in my memory," I stated, never breaking eye contact. "I have the direct cellular line to the banking director who is waiting for my specific verbal confirmation before he pushes the sale through his risk committee. If I turn around and walk out of this glass door, your deal dies on this table. First National will happily sell the paper to your biggest competitor by tomorrow morning, and you will miss out on millions." Donovan's jaw tightened. The air in the boardroom grew thick with tension. He recognized that I had boxed him into a corner. "What are your terms?" he demanded flatly. "I want 15% equity in the new holding company that acquires these 15 properties." I demanded, delivering my conditions with clinical, rehearsed precision. "Furthermore, I want to be named Chief Executive Officer of the Property Management Division. I want full operational control. I make the eviction decisions. I handle the stabilization process. I control the liquidation timeline." One of the directors slammed his open palm onto the granite table. "This is pure extortion. You are out of your mind if you think we will hand executive control to a terminated employee." I ignored the subordinate entirely. I kept my gaze locked intensely on Donovan. 7 days ago, you terminated my contract because you thought my department was a deadweight liability to your bottom line," I said, my voice ringing with undeniable authority. Today I orchestrated the sale of a $12 million distressed real estate portfolio before my morning coffee. I extracted this volatile data from a violent slumlord while he actively tried to blackmail me in a freezing basement. I am not asking for your permission to run this new empire, Donovan. I am giving you the privilege of financing it. Donovan stared at me in profound silence. He evaluated the expensive tailored suit I had purchased with borrowed money. He evaluated the unyielding, aggressive posture I maintained, despite being thrown onto the snowy streets less than 24 hours ago. Most importantly, he recognized the ruthless, calculated ambition in my eyes because it mirrored his very own business philosophy. In the high-stakes ecosystem of venture capital, personal loyalty was a foolish illusion. Leverage was the only currency that carried any real weight. I had proven I knew how to wield it. Draft the letter of intent. Donovan ordered, turning his head to address his stunned executives. Name Sarah Jenkins as the Chief Executive Officer of the newly formed property management entity. Draft a 15% equity stake that vests immediately upon the successful foreclosure and transfer of the Harrison portfolio. The executives hesitated for only a fraction of a second before scrambling to open their silver laptops. The frantic clicking of keyboards filled the room as they began typing the binding legal documents. Donovan looked back across the granite table, pointing a stern finger at my chest. "You better deliver on these numbers, Sarah. If this real estate acquisition blows up in our faces, I will bury you so deep in corporate litigation that you will never work in the financial sector again." "I will email the signed letter of intent to the commercial bank by 2:00 this afternoon," I replied calmly. I reached across the table, took a pen, and wrote the complex alphanumeric decryption code onto a sticky note. I slid the note toward him. I turned around and walked out of the boardroom. The heavy glass doors sealed shut behind me, muffling the chaotic noise of the executives securing the wire transfers. Pure adrenaline pumped through my veins, hot and electric. The trap was permanently locked. Capital Vertex was moving millions of dollars to purchase the toxic debt. Gregory Harrison thought he had evicted a helpless, desperate tenant. He had no idea he had just handed a corporate assassin the keys to his own execution. The brutal countdown to his financial ruin had officially begun. I spent the next 3 weeks operating out of a heavily discounted motel on the far south side of Chicago. The room smelled faintly of stale smoke and heavy industrial cleaner, but it had a stable internet connection and a small laminate desk that served as my war room. I worked 20-hour days living on cheap black coffee and adrenaline. I coordinated directly with a specialized team of ruthless corporate lawyers deployed by Capital Vertex. Our mission was complex, highly confidential, and required absolute precision. We were engineering a hostile corporate takeover through the covert acquisition of non-performing debt. The legal strategy was executed with silent surgical lethality. The commercial lending director at First National Commercial Bank pushed the debt sale through his risk management committee with unprecedented speed. He was desperate to purge Gregory Harrison's toxic $12 million portfolio from the bank's quarterly balance sheet before the federal auditors arrived. The transfer of the master loan was completed entirely behind closed doors. The massive stack of promissory notes, the original mortgage deeds, and the cross-collateralized guarantee documents were electronically transferred to a newly established limited liability corporation. The entity was named Apex Properties, LLC. Capital Vertex provided the massive financial backing. I was the legally named Chief Executive Officer. Gregory Harrison remained completely oblivious to the massive shift in power. He believed he was still negotiating a critical grace period with a slow-moving bureaucratic regional bank. He assumed his desperate search for a high-interest shadow loan was progressing unnoticed. He had no idea his debt had been quietly sold to an aggressive venture capital firm, and he certainly had no idea I was sitting at the helm of the operation. I monitored Gregory's daily activities through a network of disgruntled building managers and desperate tenants I had discreetly contacted. I gathered real-time intelligence on my enemy while I methodically prepared the legal instruments for his destruction. Gregory continued to parade around his crumbling empire with repulsive arrogance. He drove his silver Porsche SUV through the pothole-riddled streets of the working-class neighborhoods, collecting rent checks in person. I received reports of him aggressively threatening a single mother with immediate eviction because she was $50 short on her rent, screaming at her in front of her children, while the building's ancient boiler sat broken in the basement. He casually ignored city code violations, pocketing the cash meant for critical infrastructure repairs. He dined at expensive steakhouses in the Gold Coast, charging exorbitant meals to his struggling shell companies, fully believing he was a master manipulator, untouchable by the consequences of his fraud. He was a bloated, self-satisfied tick, gorging himself on the desperate circumstances of others. He thought he was untouchable. He had no idea that a massive, invisible net was already drawn tight around his throat, waiting for the signal to pull him under. The fatal blow was delivered not with violence, but through a standard contractual trigger. Gregory's massive balloon payment was technically due, but he was also contractually obligated to make a substantial monthly interest payment on the first of the month to maintain his supposed grace period with the original bank. He failed to make that payment. I knew he would fail. During my intense review of his stolen financial ledgers in that freezing basement, I discovered a hidden cash flow crisis. He relied on manipulating specific shadow lenders to cover his short-term operational deficits. Through a series of anonymous encrypted emails, I had systematically forwarded portions of his fraudulent tax returns to the specific underground lenders he was desperately courting. I spooked his only remaining financial lifelines. His bridge loans evaporated instantly. When the first of the month arrived, Gregory's operating accounts were severely overdrawn. His automated interest payment to the master commercial loan bounced. The failure triggered an immediate automatic contractual default. I was sitting in my cheap motel room, staring intensely at a glowing spreadsheet when the encrypted notification arrived from the Capital Vertex legal team. The payment had officially failed. The default was secured. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the lead corporate litigator assigned to my new division. The target missed the deadline, I said, keeping my voice cold and devoid of any excitement. The grace period provided by the original lender is now completely null and void. The master loan is in severe default. We have confirmation. Sarah, the lead attorney, replied, the sound of rapid typing echoing in the background. The cross-collateralization clauses give us complete authority. As the new legal owners of the promissory notes, we have the unilateral right to bypass the bankruptcy courts entirely. Execute the non-judicial foreclosure immediately, I commanded. Do not send a warning letter. Do not offer a cure period. I want the immediate seizure of all 15 properties under Harrison Holdings. I want the title deeds transferred to Apex Properties by the end of the business day. I hung up the phone and leaned back against the cheap motel headboard. A slow, chilling sense of satisfaction spread through my chest. The trap had violently snapped shut. Gregory Harrison was spending his morning sitting in a plush leather booth at a private country club, sipping a $12 mimosa and boasting to a prospective business partner about his vast real estate portfolio. He believed he was an invincible titan of Chicago property management. He was actually a bankrupt, powerless man who no longer owned a single brick of his so-called empire. The legal machinery was already moving to strip his assets, seize his bank accounts, and lock him out of his own corporate headquarters. He just had not read the paperwork yet. The absolute silence of his impending execution was the most beautiful part of the plan. I stood in the drafty corridor of the motel, staring out the window at the distant Chicago skyline. The glare of my laptop screen illuminated the dark walls of the room behind me. I was reviewing the final asset transfer documents for the Apex Properties acquisition. The legal machinery was moving seamlessly. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee, savoring the quiet hum of the mini-fridge. My cell phone vibrated against the laminate desk. The caller ID displayed Jamal's name. It was nearly midnight. A surgeon with early morning rounds did not call his sister-in-law at midnight unless a catastrophe had occurred. I answered the call. Jamal did not offer a greeting. His voice was ragged, stripped of its usual grounded warmth. It sounded like he had been hollowed out. "Sarah," he said, his breath hitching over the receiver. "I found the accounts. I found everything. I set my pen down." "What accounts, Jamal?" "The renovation." He replied, his tone laced with a profound, quiet devastation. "The $50,000 your parents took out against their home equity. Jessica told me it was for custom cabinetry and imported marble. She showed me contractor invoices. They were fake, Sarah. She forged the letterheads on her laptop. I sat up straight. The pieces of my sister's artificial life began to align with terrifying clarity. Where did the capital go? I asked, my risk analyst instincts overriding my familial shock. She was drowning in secret debt, Jamal explained. The trips to Aspen, the designer wardrobes, the country club charity events. She maxed out 4 different credit cards under her maiden name to fund a lifestyle we could not afford. When the creditors threatened to garnish my wages and expose her, she manipulated your parents into leveraging their retirement home. She siphoned their equity to pay off American Express. A cold realization washed over me. My parents had looked at my frayed wool coat, watched me face homelessness, and told me to fend for myself. They had claimed poverty while secretly plunging themselves into a predatory second mortgage just to protect Jessica's fabricated socialite status. I froze our joint accounts this evening. Jamal continued, the exhaustion heavy in his throat. I spoke to a divorce attorney this afternoon. I am leaving her, Sarah. I cannot share a life with someone who lies so effortlessly. I just wanted to check on you. I wanted to make sure you were safe from the fallout. I am safe, Jamal, I assured him. My voice softened, offering the only comfort I could to a man who had shown me grace when I had nothing. You are a good man. You are doing the right thing. Cut your losses and protect your assets. Jamal disconnected the call. The silence in the motel room felt different now. It was the calm before a storm. I knew my sister. When cornered, a narcissist does not reflect or apologize. They lash out and demand a scapegoat. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated again. It was a group FaceTime call from my mother. I answered, keeping the camera off. Sarah, my mother wailed into the receiver. Her voice was shrill, teetering on the edge of hysteria. You have to help us. The bank sent a notice. We missed 2 payments on the second mortgage. Jamal cut off Jessica's access to his income. They are going to foreclose on the house. We are going to lose everything. I listened to the panic in her voice. A month ago, hearing my mother cry would have broken my heart. Today it sounded like static. You took out a loan you could not afford to finance a lie, I stated flatly. The bank is executing a standard risk mitigation protocol. You are over-leveraged. A sharp scuffle echoed through the line. Jessica snatched the phone away from our mother. Her voice did not carry guilt or shame. It dripped with venom and entitlement. This is your fault, Jessica screamed. If you had kept your corporate job, you could have lent me the money. I would not have needed to use Mom and Dad. If you had a real career, you could have given me a personal loan and kept this quiet. You ruined my marriage because you are a useless failure. I stared at the blank wall of the motel room. The sheer audacity of her accusation was a marvel of psychological delusion. She had committed financial fraud against her own parents, destroyed a marriage to a dedicated surgeon, and yet her brain instantly contorted the narrative to make my unemployment the root cause of her crimes. My father chimed in from the background, his voice tight with misplaced anger. Sarah, your sister made a mistake, but we are family. Family sacrifices for each other. You need to go to a payday lender, get a cash advance, take out whatever credit lines you can find, and wire us the funds by tomorrow morning. We have to save this house. We have to protect Jessica's reputation before the country club finds out Jamal left her. I sat in the uncomfortable desk chair. I looked at the spreadsheet glowing on my laptop screen. I was currently orchestrating the multi-million-dollar acquisition of 15 commercial properties. I held the operational control of a private equity subsidiary. I possessed the capital to pay off their second mortgage with a single wire transfer. I could save them with a phone call. I did not feel an ounce of desire to do so. I realized in that distinct moment that Gregory Harrison and my family shared the exact same pathology. They were parasites. Gregory extracted rent from struggling tenants to fund his luxury cars, threatening them with homelessness if they fell short. My family extracted equity, sanity, and stability to fund a fragile illusion of superiority, demanding I destroy my own future to shield them from consequences. They did not view me as a daughter or a sister. They viewed me as a designated shock absorber for their reckless behavior. Are you listening to me, Sarah? My father demanded, raising his voice. Go to the bank first thing in the morning. Secure a loan. We need $40,000 to stabilize the account. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the laminate desk. I kept my breathing even. I spoke with the clinical detachment of a forensic auditor delivering a terminal verdict. I am not your bank, I said. I am not your safety net. I am not the designated collateral for your financial incompetence. Sarah, do not you dare speak to your father that way, my mother shrieked. Jessica chimed in, her voice shrill and desperate. You owe us. You have always been a burden. For once in your life, make yourself useful and fix this. I did not raise my voice. I did not match their hysteria. I delivered my final statement with lethal precision. You chose to finance a fraud, Jessica. You chose to mortgage your retirement for a kitchen remodel, Mom. You chose to enable a parasite dad. Now the bill is due. The bank is going to take your house. Jamal is going to take his freedom. And you are going to face the reality of the choices you made. Do not ever call this number again. But Sarah, we are your blood, my mother cried out, a pathetic last-ditch effort to invoke guilt. Blood is just a biological coincidence, I replied coldly. It does not entitle you to my life. Enjoy the foreclosure. I pressed the red button on the screen. The frantic noise of my family vanished, replaced by the soothing, unbroken silence of the motel room. I opened my phone settings. I selected my mother's contact. Block. I selected my father's contact. Block. I selected Jessica's contact. Block. The digital severing was instantaneous. I placed the phone face down on the desk. A profound sense of clarity washed over me. I felt no grief. I felt no remorse. I felt a structural alignment within my own mind. I had spent 29 years trying to earn a place at a table that was built on rotting wood. I had allowed their constant criticism to dictate my self-worth. By cutting the cord, I cauterized a wound that had been bleeding my entire life. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the punching bag for a sister who built her life on deceit. I was a free, independent operator. I turned my attention back to the glowing screen of my laptop. The final deeds of trust for the Harrison Holdings portfolio were ready for my digital signature. I had just purged the toxic DNA from my personal life. Tomorrow I would purge the toxic landlord from the Chicago real estate market. I typed my name into the execution software. Sarah Jenkins, Chief Executive Officer, Apex Properties, LLC. I hit submit. The files transmitted to the county recorder's office. The transfer was permanent. I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked over to the motel window. The city skyline flickered in the distance. The predators who had tried to bury me were now the ones trapped under the soil. I had severed the dead weight. Now it was time to build an empire. The harsh winter sunlight offered no warmth to the crumbling facade of the Logan Square apartment complex. Gregory Harrison stood in the center of the drafty lobby, his breath visible in the freezing air. The building's ancient boiler had failed again, leaving 50 families shivering in their units. But Gregory did not care about the temperature. He only cared about the rent collection. He was currently cornering Mrs. Abernathy, a retired widow who had lived in Unit 2B for over a decade. She held a stack of wrinkled $20 bills, her hands trembling as she tried to hand them to her landlord. "This is $40 short." Mrs. Abernathy, Gregory snapped, slapping the cash away. His voice echoed off the peeling paint of the lobby walls. "I told you last month I do not accept partial payments. Rent is due on the 1st. It is the 3rd. My Social Security check was delayed because of the federal holiday, Mr. Harrison. She pleaded, her voice thin and desperate. "I can have the rest to you by Friday. Please, it is freezing in my apartment." Gregory leaned in, using his physical size to intimidate the elderly woman. "I am not running a charity. You pay in full by 5 o'clock today, or I am taping a 7-day eviction notice to your door. Do not test me. I threw a finance hotshot out into the snow last month. I will not hesitate to do the same to you." He turned his back on her before she could respond, marching toward the management office, situated at the rear of the lobby. He unlocked the frosted glass door, stepping into the small, cluttered room. The space smelled faintly of cheap cigars and stale coffee. He tossed Mrs. Abernathy's cash onto his messy laminate desk, fully intending to pocket the money without logging it into the official ledger. Gregory checked the brass mailbox mounted on the wall next to the door. It was mostly stuffed with utility bills he had no intention of paying, and complaints from city code inspectors he routinely ignored. He grabbed the stack of mail and began sorting through it, tossing the colorful junk mail directly into the trash bin. He paused. Buried in the middle of the stack was a thick, oversized envelope made of heavy, cream-colored stationery. It did not bear the familiar logo of his preferred shadow lenders or the threatening red ink of a municipal warning. The return address was printed in sharp, embossed black lettering. Apex Properties, LLC, 45th floor Capitol Vertex Tower, Chicago, Illinois. Gregory frowned. Capital Vertex was a massive, aggressive private equity firm. They operated in the stratosphere of high finance, orchestrating billion-dollar acquisitions and hostile takeovers. They did not send casual mail to mid-tier slum landlords in Logan Square. He slid his thumb under the flap and tore the heavy envelope open. He pulled out a crisp, legal-sized document. The header was printed in bold, uncompromising font. Notice of immediate asset seizure and transfer of ownership. Gregory scoffed a dismissive sound echoing in the empty office. He leaned back against the edge of his desk, expecting a generic solicitation or a poorly targeted marketing campaign. He began to skim the dense legal jargon. This document serves as formal notification that Apex Properties, LLC, a subsidiary of Capital Vertex, has successfully acquired the non-performing commercial debt previously held by First National Commercial Bank under Master Loan Agreement 8847. Gregory's eyes stopped moving. His breath hitched in his throat. Due to the borrower's severe and uncorrected default on the required interest payments, Apex Properties, LLC has executed its right of non-judicial foreclosure. Ownership of all 15 properties listed under the Harrison Holdings portfolio, including the premises located at Logan Square, has been permanently transferred to Apex Properties, LLC. Gregory read the paragraph again. The words blurred together. The arrogant smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden violent panic. He dropped the envelope. He grabbed the desk to steady himself. The bank had sold his debt. First National Commercial Bank had not granted him a grace period. They had not waited for him to secure a shadow loan. They had quietly, ruthlessly packaged his toxic $12 million debt and sold it to an apex predator firm. And because he had missed that single crucial interest payment, the new owners had legally seized his entire empire without ever stepping foot inside a courtroom. Gregory felt the blood drain from his face. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He read the final paragraph of the legal notice. Gregory Harrison is hereby ordered to vacate all management offices and relinquish all keys, ledgers, and operational control of the aforementioned properties within 24 hours. Failure to comply will result in immediate removal by armed security personnel and local law enforcement for criminal trespassing. He was being evicted. The man who had spent the morning threatening to throw a widow onto the street was now being legally expelled from his own building. He was bankrupt. He had lost the cross-collateralized portfolio. He had lost the phantom equity. He had nothing. Gregory let out a short, hysterical laugh. He gripped the edge of the paper, ready to tear the document into shreds, ready to call his corrupt police contacts and declare the notice a forgery. He looked down to find the signature of the executive who had authorized the seizure. He intended to memorize the name of the venture capitalist who had orchestrated his ruin. His eyes locked onto the bottom of the page. The signature was executed in sharp, precise black ink. It was not a sprawling, illegible corporate scrawl. It was clear, deliberate, and undeniably familiar. Gregory stared at the signature line. Sarah Jenkins, Chief Executive Officer, Apex Properties, LLC. Gregory froze. The ambient noise of the Chicago street outside his window faded into complete silence. He stopped breathing. He brought the paper closer to his face, his hands trembling violently. He read the name again, and again. Sarah Jenkins, the broke tenant, the desperate analyst he had locked in a freezing basement, the woman he had physically intimidated, threatened with arrest, and violently thrown into the snow just 4 weeks ago. He had mocked her. He had broken her laptop. He had smugly told her she had no leverage and no power. He had paraded his corrupt police connections in her face and locked the glass doors on her, confident he had won. She had not run away to hide in a shelter. She had walked straight into a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm, leveraged the very financial fraud he forced her to uncover, and bought his entire life. She was not a victim. She was the chief executive officer of the company that now owned every brick, every lease, and every bank account attached to his name. Gregory dropped the paper. It fluttered to the dirty floor of the management office. He looked around the small room. The rusted filing cabinets, the cheap laminate desk, the stack of uncashed rent checks. None of it belonged to him anymore. He was a trespasser in a building owned by the woman he had tried to destroy. The crushing, suffocating realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The trap had not just closed, it had locked, and Sarah Jenkins was holding the only key. Gregory Harrison did not call his lawyers. He did not attempt to verify the documents with the county recorder's office. Blind panic and feral rage overrode any remaining shred of logic he possessed. He grabbed his coat, shoved past a shivering tenant in the lobby, and threw himself into his silver Porsche. He drove erratically through the freezing Chicago traffic, running red lights and cutting off city buses. He was hyperventilating by the time he parked illegally in front of the towering glass skyscraper that housed Capitol Vertex. He stormed through the revolving doors of the lobby, ignoring the massive security desk. He merged into a group of executives entering an elevator bank and pressed the button for the 45th floor. He practically vibrated with furious energy as the elevator ascended, his fists clenched tight at his sides. He was going to expose the fraud. He was going to threaten the executives. He was going to prove that he could not be dismantled by a displaced, unemployed tenant. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. The 45th floor did not look like a struggling property management office. It was a sprawling, ultra-modern executive suite. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered panoramic views of Lake Michigan. The reception area featured a sleek marble desk and brushed steel accents. The embossed lettering on the glass partition read, Apex Properties, LLC. Gregory ignored the receptionist who called out to him. He marched past her desk, his heavy footsteps thudding aggressively against the hardwood floor. He scanned the nameplates on the glass doors lining the corridor until he found the largest office at the very end of the hall. The frosted glass door bore a simple, stark inscription, Sarah Jenkins, Chief Executive Officer. Gregory did not knock. He grabbed the handle and shoved the heavy glass door open with enough force that it slammed loudly against the interior wall. I was waiting for him. I sat behind a massive, polished granite desk. I wore a tailored midnight blue blazer that cost more than Gregory collected in a month of rent. The city skyline stretched out behind me, framing my silhouette in stark, freezing light. I was not sorting through moldy banker boxes in a diesel-fumed basement. I held a sleek ceramic mug of hot black coffee. I took a slow, deliberate sip, my eyes locking onto the frantic, disheveled man standing in my doorway. "What the hell are you doing here?" Gregory roared, his voice cracking with desperation and fury. He stepped into the office, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "This is fraud. This is extortion. You forged that notice. You do not own my buildings." I set my coffee mug down on a leather coaster. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I projected the absolute chilling authority of a woman holding all the leverage. "Good morning, Gregory," I said, my voice smooth and clinical. "You are trespassing in a private corporate office. I suggest you lower your voice before I have building security escort you out." "You stole my portfolio," he screamed, slamming both of his palms down onto the edge of my granite desk. The loud smack echoed in the quiet executive suite. "You went to my lenders behind my back. You used the financial data I showed you to engineer a hostile takeover. I will sue you. I will sue this entire firm. I will have you arrested for corporate espionage." I leaned back in my high-backed leather chair. I steepled my fingers watching him unravel. The arrogant landlord who had threatened me with corrupted police officers was gone. The man standing before me was a cornered animal rapidly realizing the trap had crushed his spine. "You cannot sue anyone," Gregory the First stated flatly. "You missed your interest payment on the first of the month. Your cross-collateralized loans immediately entered severe default. First National Commercial Bank sold your toxic debt to my firm at a steep discount to clear their balance sheet. As the new legal owners of the promissory notes, Apex Properties executed a non-judicial foreclosure. We bypassed the courts entirely. You do not own Harrison Holdings anymore. You do not own the buildings. You do not even own the chair you sit in at your dirty little desk." Gregory stared at me, his chest heaving. The color drained from his face as the irrefutable financial logic finally pierced through his panic. He realized I was not bluffing. The seizure was legal. The transfer was permanent. "But you," he stammered, his voice dropping into a hoarse, defeated whisper. "You were broke. You could not even afford the security deposit on a new apartment. How did you get the capital to buy a $12 million note?" "I did not need capital," I replied, my gaze cold and unyielding. "I needed leverage. You handed me your fraudulent tax returns and your defaulted loan notices. You gave me the exact blueprints I needed to broker the acquisition. Capital Vertex provided the funds. They gave me 15% equity and executive control of this division as my finder's fee. I reached into the top drawer of my granite desk. I pulled out a single sheet of neon green paper. It was not a corporate document. It was a harsh, vibrant color designed to induce panic. I slid the neon green paper across the smooth surface of the desk until it stopped right in front of his trembling hands. Gregory looked down. It was an eviction notice. It was printed on the exact same paper stock, using the exact same aggressive formatting as the notice he had taped to my apartment door 4 weeks ago. You have 1 hour to return to the Logan Square property and remove your personal belongings from the ground floor management office, I commanded, using the exact dismissive cadence he had used on me. You are to surrender all master keys, all access codes, and all physical ledgers to the armed security team currently waiting in the lobby. Gregory stared at the eviction notice. The cruel irony paralyzed him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. If you attempt to enter any other building in the portfolio, you will be arrested for trespassing. I continued leaning forward to ensure every word landed with devastating impact. The buildings belong to me now. You cannot do this, he finally managed to whisper. He looked up, his eyes pleading, searching for a shred of the desperate tenant he thought he had broken. Please, Sarah. That portfolio is my entire life. I built that company from nothing. I will lose everything. My house, my cars. I will be bankrupt. I looked at the man who had thrown my winter coats into a dirty hallway. I looked at the man who had screamed at an elderly widow over $40. I looked at the man who had tried to force me into committing federal wire fraud to save his own skin. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I felt the pure, sterile satisfaction of a balanced ledger. Rent is rent, Gregory, I said, repeating the exact words he had sneered at me when he threw me into the snow. I am not running a charity. You owe my firm $12 million. I pointed toward the glass door. You have 59 minutes left. I suggest you start packing. Gregory did not turn around and walk away. The shock wearing off his survival instincts kicked in raw and ugly. The desperation contorted his face into a sneer of pure, venomous hatred. He slammed his fist against the green eviction notice, crinkling the harsh paper. You think you are untouchable sitting in this fancy office. He spat, his voice escalating into a frantic shout. You are nothing but a thief. You stole proprietary financial information. You committed corporate espionage. I will hire the best litigators in Chicago. I will drag you and this entire equity firm into federal court. I will have you deposed, discredited, and thrown into a prison cell. You have not won, Sarah. This is just the beginning. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match his hysteria. I picked up my ceramic mug and took another slow sip of coffee. You are not going to hire anyone, Gregory, I stated, setting the mug down. You cannot afford a lawyer. Your operating accounts were seized by Apex Properties at 9 o'clock this morning. Your personal assets are cross-collateralized with the toxic debt you just defaulted on. You are currently entirely insolvent. He leaned across the desk, his face inches from mine, his breath ragged. You arrogant little bitch, he hissed. I know people, powerful people. You think you can just erase me? I will ruin you. I offered a thin, clinical smile. You are already ruined, Gregory, and you did it to yourself. I just expedited the paperwork. I shifted my gaze from his furious eyes and looked directly past him, focusing on the frosted glass door of my office. I offered a slight, deliberate nod. The heavy glass door swung open. 2 men walked into the executive suite. They did not wear the tailored suits of venture capitalists or the uniform of building security. They wore utilitarian gray suits and sensible shoes. They carried themselves with the heavy, unyielding authority of the federal government. Badges hung from lanyards around their necks. Gregory froze, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. He turned around slowly. Gregory Harrison, the taller of the 2 men, asked. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. Gregory stared at the badges. The color that had returned to his face during his tirade instantly vanished, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. Yes, he whispered, the fight completely draining out of him. I am Special Agent Miller, Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, the man stated, pulling a folded document from his interior jacket pocket. We have a federal warrant for your arrest. You are being charged with multiple counts of tax evasion, wire fraud, and the submission of fraudulent financial documents to secure commercial lending." Gregory stumbled backward, hitting the edge of my granite desk. His eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an exit that did not exist. "This is a mistake," he stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "My books are complicated, but they are not fraudulent. I have an accountant. I can explain the capital expenditures." "You can explain them to the federal prosecutor," Agent Miller replied smoothly. "We have received a comprehensive whistleblower report containing 3 years of dual ledgers, offshore wire transfers, and unredacted bank statements proving the systematic inflation of capital expenses to avoid federal taxation. The evidence is conclusive." Gregory whipped his head around to stare at me. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. During those freezing hours in the basement of Logan Square, while he thought I was desperately fabricating documents to save his empire and keep my apartment, I was systematically dismantling his entire life. I had not just downloaded the data to broker the hostile takeover with Capital Vertex. I had compiled a pristine, irrefutable dossier of his criminal enterprise and submitted it directly to the IRS whistleblower office. I had handed the federal government the exact roadmap they needed to secure an indictment. "You!" Gregory breathed, his voice cracking with absolute terror. "You set me up." "I did not set you up, Gregory," I corrected him, my voice colder than the Chicago winter outside. "You built a criminal enterprise by exploiting desperate people. You forced me into your basement and demanded I commit a felony on your behalf. I simply refused to be your accomplice. I chose to be your executioner instead." Agent Miller stepped forward, retrieving a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Please turn around and place your hands behind your back, Mr. Harrison." Gregory did not resist. The fight was entirely gone, replaced by the crushing reality of his impending incarceration. He turned around, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. The cold metallic click of the handcuffs echoing in the pristine executive suite was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. As the agents turned him toward the door, Gregory looked over his shoulder at me one last time. There was no arrogance left. There was no rage. There was only the hollow, terrified stare of a man who realized he had handed the weapon of his destruction to the one person smart enough to pull the trigger. "Take him out through the freight elevator, please," I requested, addressing Agent Miller. "We prefer to keep the executive lobby clear of criminal disturbances." Agent Miller offered a brief professional nod. "Let us go, Mr. Harrison." They marched him out of my office. I watched through the glass walls as the slumlord who had threatened to throw me into the snow was escorted down the corporate corridor in handcuffs. He walked with a heavy, shuffling gait, stripped of his power, stripped of his wealth, and stripped of his freedom. I sat alone in the quiet suite. I picked up the neon green eviction notice from my desk and dropped it into the shredder. The first phase of my operation was complete. The parasite was removed. Now it was time to deal with the family that had tried to feed me to him. The financial acquisition hit the local business wire by 9:00 the next morning. Capital Vertex was known for high-profile moves, but the rapid, non-judicial seizure of a $12 million residential portfolio generated significant chatter. A brief write-up in the Chicago Business Journal detailed the aggressive restructuring. My name was prominently featured in the second paragraph. Sarah Jenkins, former risk analyst, named Chief Executive Officer of the newly formed Apex Properties LLC, tasked with liquidating the distressed Harrison Holdings assets. I was reviewing vendor contracts for the Logan Square boiler replacement when the intercom on my desk buzzed. Ms. Jenkins, my administrative assistant, said, her tone laced with confusion and mild alarm. "There is a group of people in the lobby demanding to see you. They claim to be your parents and your sister. They do not have an appointment, but they are refusing to leave the reception area." I stopped typing. The speed at which they had tracked me down was impressive, though entirely predictable. Predators always find the scent of fresh capital. "Send them back," I instructed, "but keep security on standby." I closed my laptop and stood up, smoothing the front of my midnight blue blazer. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city. I was not nervous. I was not angry. I was simply curious to see how quickly they would attempt to rewrite history. The heavy glass door swung open. My mother entered first, clutching a pink bakery box from an expensive patisserie in Winnetka. My father followed, wearing his best Sunday suit. Jessica trailed behind them, lacking her usual arrogant strut, clutching a designer handbag like a shield. They stopped in the center of the expansive executive office. Their eyes darted around, taking in the panoramic views, the imported granite desk, the undeniable physical proof of immense corporate power. The contrast between this room and the freezing stairwell they had abandoned me in was staggering. "Sarah," my mother gasped, rushing forward and placing the bakery box on my desk. She reached out, attempting to grasp my hands, her face arranged in a mask of overwhelming maternal pride. "Oh, sweetheart, we saw the news this morning. Chief Executive Officer, we are so incredibly proud of you. We always knew you were destined for greatness." I stepped back out of her reach, letting her hands fall to empty air. "You always knew," I repeated, keeping my voice entirely devoid of inflection. "Of course we did," my father chimed in, offering a hearty, artificial chuckle. "That fancy finance degree finally paid off. We knew you just needed a little tough love to push you into your full potential." I stared at the man who had yelled at me to take out a payday loan to cover his fraudulent mortgage. "Tough love," I echoed. "Is that what you call telling your daughter she is a useless leech while she is facing homelessness in the middle of winter?" My mother waved her hand dismissively, offering a forced, brittle laugh. "Oh, Sarah, do not dwell on the past. Families fight. It is normal. We were all just stressed about the bank notice. You know how it is. But look at you now. You have your own empire." She leaned closer, dropping her voice into a conspiratorial, pleading whisper. The fake tears materialized instantly, pooling in her eyes. "And we really need your help, Sarah. Jamal is being completely unreasonable. He filed for divorce yesterday. He froze all the joint accounts. The bank is moving forward with the foreclosure on our house. We are going to lose everything because of that stupid $50,000 loan." "You mean the loan you took out to finance Jessica's fake kitchen invoices so she could pay off her secret credit card debt?" I clarified, stripping away their euphemisms. Jessica bristled, her inherent entitlement breaking through the facade of the desperate family reunion. She stepped out from behind our father, her jaw tight. "It was a misunderstanding," Jessica snapped. "Jamal overreacted. But you can fix this, Sarah. You are a CEO now. You have access to millions. $50,000 is pocket change to you. Just wire the money to the bank and clear the second mortgage. We can put this whole ugly mess behind us." I looked at my older sister. She stood in my office demanding I deploy corporate funds to bail her out of federal financial fraud, showing absolutely zero remorse for destroying her marriage or bankrupting our parents. The sheer, unadulterated audacity was breathtaking. "I am not authorizing a corporate wire transfer to pay off your fraudulent debt, Jessica." I stated, my voice echoing coldly off the glass walls. "That is embezzlement. I do not run my company like Gregory Harrison ran his." "Fine," Jessica scoffed, rolling her eyes and crossing her arms. "Then just give me an apartment. You own 15 buildings now. Give me a luxury unit in one of the nice neighborhoods, rent-free, obviously. Jamal kicked me out of the house and my credit is ruined. I need a place to stay while my lawyers handle the divorce settlement. You owe me that much." I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the depth of her delusion. "You want a free luxury apartment?" "Yes," she demanded, tapping her foot impatiently. "You have hundreds of units. It will not cost you anything." My mother nodded eagerly, reaching for my hand again. "It is the perfect solution, Sarah. You can help your sister get back on her feet. We can all be a family again. We can spend the holidays at your new properties. It will be wonderful." I looked at the three people standing in my office. They had mocked my career, denied me a $2,000 loan when I was desperate, and demanded I ruin my credit to save them from their own lies. Now, standing in the shadow of my success, they expected me to simply absorb their massive liabilities and hand them the keys to my empire. They did not view me as a daughter who had achieved something remarkable. They viewed me as a freshly unlocked ATM. I picked up the pink bakery box from my desk. I did not open it. I held it out toward my mother. "Take your pastries," I commanded. My voice was no longer clinical. It was lethal. The absolute unyielding tone of an executive terminating a hostile negotiation. My mother recoiled, her fake smile shattering. "Sarah, what are you doing?" "I am establishing a permanent boundary," I replied. "I am not paying off your fraudulent mortgage. I am not providing free housing to a parasite. I am not fixing the lives you destroyed with your own greed." "Sarah," my father bellowed, his face turning a dark, furious red. "You cannot turn your back on your own blood. We are your parents. You owe us respect." I dropped the bakery box onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. "I do not owe you a single thing," I said, staring him down. "When I needed respect, you told me I was a failure. When I needed shelter, you told me to fend for myself. I built this company without your support, and I will run it without your interference." I reached for the telephone on my desk. I pressed the button for the front desk. "Emily," I said, keeping my eyes locked on my family. "Send the security team into my office immediately. I have 3 trespassers who need to be escorted out of the building." The intercom beeped as I disconnected the call to the security desk. The silence that followed was suffocating. My family stared at me, the reality of my refusal finally breaching their collective delusion. They had walked in expecting a reluctant benefactor. They were about to walk out with nothing. "You cannot be serious," my father sputtered, taking an aggressive step toward my desk. "You are going to have your own parents thrown out by security guards. Over money." I stood up, resting my knuckles on the cool granite surface. "It is not over money, Dad. It is over your complete lack of humanity. You think I am a bank," I stated, enunciating each word with crystal clarity. "You think I am a designated ATM that exists solely to dispense cash whenever Jessica's lies catch up with her." "Sarah, please." My mother sobbed, real panic setting in as she realized I was not bluffing. "We are going to be homeless." I looked at her, my expression utterly detached. "I know exactly how that feels, Mom. When I was facing eviction, standing in the freezing hallway with my belongings in garbage bags, you mocked me. You told me to grow up. The only person in our entire extended family who offered me a single ounce of help was Jamal." Jessica scoffed, rolling her eyes and shifting her weight. "Oh, please. Jamal is a self-righteous idiot who overreacted to a few credit card bills. You and he are perfect for each other. Both of you are obsessed with punishing me for trying to live a decent life." I stared at my sister. Her inability to comprehend the severity of her actions was pathological. She had drained our parents' retirement, destroyed her marriage, and yet she stood in my office actively complaining about the people she had victimized. I reached into the top drawer of my desk. I pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila envelope and tossed it across the polished granite. It slid to a halt right in front of Jessica. "What is this?" she demanded, staring at the envelope as if it were a bomb. "That is a copy of the comprehensive financial dossier I couriered to Jamal's divorce attorneys yesterday afternoon," I explained smoothly. Jessica's head snapped up. The color drained from her face. "You see, Jessica?" I continued, my voice echoing the clinical precision of a corporate auditor. "Jamal is a decent man. He works 80-hour weeks saving lives. He did not deserve to have his credit ruined and his assets drained by a narcissistic fraud. When he told me you forged contractor invoices to siphon $50,000 from our parents, I did not just listen. I verified the transaction. I pointed at the thick envelope. I used my resources to trace the electronic routing numbers. I tracked the fraudulent invoices back to the IP address of your personal laptop. I compiled a pristine, irrefutable paper trail proving you committed wire fraud and financial elder abuse against your own parents to fund your luxury lifestyle. Jamal's legal team is submitting that dossier to the family court judge during your divorce proceedings. They will use it to ensure you receive absolutely zero alimony, and they are forwarding a copy to the district attorney for potential criminal charges." Jessica stared at me, her eyes wide with mounting terror. "You gave my husband my financial records?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I gave a victim the evidence he needed to escape his abuser," I corrected her. "You malicious, vindictive little bitch," Jessica shrieked. She lunged forward, swiping her arm across my desk in a blind rage. She knocked the pink bakery box onto the floor and sent my pen cup clattering against the glass wall. She reached for the collar of my blazer. Her fingers curled into claws. I did not flinch. I did not step back. Before her hands could make contact, the heavy glass doors of my office swung open. 3 large security guards dressed in sharp black suits rushed into the room. The lead guard grabbed Jessica by the shoulders, pulling her back with a firm, practiced grip. "Let go of me!" Jessica screamed, thrashing wildly against the guard's hold. "You cannot do this. I will destroy you, Sarah. I will tell everyone what a psychopath you are. Ma, you need to calm down and come with us," the guard ordered, securing her arms behind her back. My father tried to intervene, raising his hands toward the guards. "Hey, take it easy. That is my daughter. She is just upset." The second guard stepped directly into my father's path, creating an immovable human barrier. "Sir, you have been asked to leave the premises. Please proceed to the elevators immediately, or the police will be called." My mother burst into fresh hysterical tears, clutching her purse to her chest. She looked at me, pleading for a final reprieve. "Sarah, how can you do this to us? We are your family. You lost the right to call yourselves my family the night you told me to sleep on the street," I replied, my voice carrying zero warmth. "Escort them to the ground floor," I instructed the lead guard. "Ensure their names are permanently added to the building's restricted access list. If they attempt to bypass the lobby again, have them arrested for trespassing." The guards did not hesitate. They marched my family out of the executive suite. Jessica continued to scream, her shrill voice echoing down the corporate corridor, a chaotic, humiliating sound that drew the stares of my entire staff. She kicked at the glass doors as they dragged her toward the elevators, hurling insults and threats that faded as the heavy steel doors finally slid shut. I stood alone in my office. I looked down at the crushed bakery box on the hardwood floor and the scattered pens. I did not feel a rush of triumphant joy. I did not feel the cinematic closure of a long-awaited revenge. I felt a profound, heavy silence, the chaotic noise that had defined my entire life, the constant belittling, the endless demands, the frantic scrambling to earn approval from people who were fundamentally incapable of offering it, was finally gone. I had severed the toxic artery. The infection was cleared. I walked over, picked up the scattered pens, and placed them neatly back into the cup. I tossed the ruined pastries into the trash bin. I sat back down in my leather chair and pulled my laptop open. I had 15 residential buildings to stabilize and a multi-million-dollar real estate empire to manage. I did not have time to dwell on the parasites I had just expelled. The past was permanently locked out. The future belonged entirely to me. The quiet hum of the independent coffee shop in the West Loop offered a stark contrast to the sterile, high-stakes environment of my corporate office. The air smelled of roasted beans and rain-damp coats. I sat in a secluded corner booth watching the relentless Chicago drizzle trace erratic patterns against the large window pane. I checked my watch. It was 2:15 in the afternoon. Jamal walked through the front door right on time. He wore a heavy wool peacoat over his blue surgical scrubs, looking exhausted, but notably lighter than the last time I saw him. The crushing weight of Jessica's fabricated lifestyle seemed to have lifted from his broad shoulders, leaving behind the quiet, steady resilience of a man who had finally reclaimed his reality. He spotted me in the corner and offered a tired but genuine smile. He walked over and slid into the booth opposite me. "Thank you for meeting me, Jamal," I said, pushing a freshly brewed black coffee across the table toward him. "I know your schedule is brutal right now." He wrapped his large hands around the warm mug, letting out a long exhale. "It is better than it was, Sarah. The quiet is nice. A small apartment near the hospital is a lot easier to manage than a stone estate I never really wanted in the first place." I nodded, understanding the profound relief of escaping a toxic environment. "You moved out completely." He took a sip of the coffee. "Yesterday. The lawyers are handling the rest." And regarding that, he paused, his dark eyes locking onto mine with sincere gratitude. "I need to thank you. The financial dossier you provided my legal team expedited the entire process. The judge reviewed the forged contractor invoices and the routed funds. Jessica has been barred from accessing any of my remaining accounts, and alimony is completely off the table. You saved me from years of litigation. I only provided the data, Jamal, I replied softly. You are the one who had the courage to walk away." I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled out a crisp white envelope and placed it carefully on the wooden table between us. I slid it toward him. "What is this?" he asked, his brow furrowing in confusion. I opened the flap and pushed a certified cashier's check into his line of sight. The ink displayed a prominent figure, $25,000. Jamal stared at the check, then looked up at me, shaking his head. "Sarah, I cannot take this." "Yes, you can." I insisted, keeping my voice firm but warm. "You gave me $5,000 in cash on the absolute worst night of my life. You handed me that envelope when my own parents told me to sleep on the street. That money was not just rent, Jamal. It was the seed capital I used to broker a multi-million-dollar real estate acquisition. It kept me out of a homeless shelter, and it bought me the suit I wore to negotiate the hostile takeover of my landlord's empire. I tapped the edge of the check. The $5,000 is the principal. The remaining $20,000 is the return on your investment. Consider it a hazard pay dividend for dealing with my sister's insanity. Use it to cover your elite divorce attorneys. Jamal looked at the check for a long moment. He let out a soft, echoing laugh, a sound of pure disbelief. He reached across the table, picked up the cashier's check, and studied the numbers. "You actually did it," he murmured, shaking his head in quiet awe. "You built the empire you promised." "I did," I confirmed. "And I could not have launched the offensive without your initial backing. Take the money, Jamal. It is clean capital." He looked at me, his expression softening into profound respect. He pulled a pen from his scrub pocket. He flipped the cashier's check over and endorsed the back with his signature. He did not put the check into his coat. He slid it back across the table toward me. "I will take the $5,000 principal, Sarah," he said, his voice carrying the immovable integrity that defined his entire career. "You can wire it to my checking account this afternoon, but I am not taking the $20,000 premium. Jamal, it is a legitimate return on investment," I argued, slightly taken aback by his refusal. "You deserve it." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "You misunderstand the nature of the investment, Sarah. I did not give you that money to secure a financial yield. I gave you that money because you were family, and you were freezing, and nobody else in that massive house cared whether you survived the night." He offered a sad, knowing smile. "I spent 5 years married to a woman who viewed every relationship as a transactional ledger, who measured love by the price tag of a kitchen renovation. I am done with transactional relationships." He tapped the table gently. "You earned that empire with your own brilliant, ruthless mind. The $20,000 belongs to you. Keep it. Invest it in your new properties. Fix a boiler for someone who is freezing. That is a much better return on my investment than paying a divorce lawyer." I looked at the endorsed check sitting between us. I had spent the last month operating in a world defined by cutthroat leverage, hostile acquisitions, and brutal retaliation. I had weaponized financial data to destroy the people who had tried to destroy me. I had assumed that every interaction required a calculated exchange of power. Jamal was demonstrating a different kind of strength, the quiet, unshakable power of grace. "Thank you, Jamal," I whispered, my throat tightening with a sudden, unexpected emotion. "Not just for the money, for seeing me, for treating me like a human being when my own blood refused to." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, a brief grounding connection. "Real family is not defined by biological genetics, Sarah. Real family are the people who help you carry the weight when the bridge collapses. You are a good person. You survived the fire. Now go enjoy the warmth." He stood up, grabbing his heavy wool coat. He offered a final respectful nod before turning and walking out into the gray Chicago afternoon. The little bell above the coffee shop door jingled softly as he disappeared into the city crowd. I sat alone in the booth for a long time. I watched the rain wash down the window pane. I picked up the cashier's check and tucked it safely back into my blazer pocket. The crushing anger that had fueled my hostile takeover finally began to dissipate, replaced by a profound, settling peace. The toxic ties were permanently severed. The debts were settled. The boundaries were cleanly drawn. I was no longer fighting for my survival. I was finally ready to live. 6 months slipped by with the quiet efficiency of a well-balanced ledger. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago is an imposing structure entirely devoid of warmth, built of cold granite and polished steel. I sat in the back row of the gallery on a Tuesday morning, watching the final gavel fall on Gregory Harrison. He wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. His shoulders were rounded, his chest hollowed out. The arrogant strut that defined his existence was entirely erased by the crushing weight of the federal justice system. His defense attorney had attempted to negotiate a lighter sentence, citing Gregory's supposed community contributions. The federal prosecutor dismantled the argument in minutes. The paper trail of forged tax returns, stolen repair loans, and offshore wire transfers. I handed the IRS was too pristine to dispute. The forensic accounting was airtight. Realizing he was staring down a decade of litigation he could not afford, Gregory pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud and tax evasion. The judge did not care about his golf club memberships or his corrupt police connections. She read the sentence with clinical detachment. 60 months in federal prison followed by 3 years of supervised release and court-ordered restitution that would keep him destitute for the rest of his natural life. As the federal marshals secured his handcuffs to escort him toward the holding cells, Gregory glanced over his shoulder. His eyes scanned the crowded gallery and locked onto mine. I did not smile. I did not offer a victorious wave. I simply maintained eye contact, my expression as flat as a pane of glass, until the heavy wooden doors closed behind him. The slumlord who once threatened to drag me into the snow was now a ward of the state. Justice for my family did not occur in a courtroom. It played out in the harsh, unforgiving arena of financial consequence. Jamal finalized the divorce with lethal speed. The comprehensive dossier I provided his legal team proved that Jessica orchestrated financial elder abuse and systemic fraud. Her attorneys were completely paralyzed by the digital footprint tracking her forged invoices. The family court judge denied her alimony request entirely, stripping her of the lavish socialite lifestyle she had destroyed her marriage to maintain. With her credit score decimated and her reputation shredded among the Winnetka elite, Jessica found herself unhireable and unwelcome. She ended up renting a cramped, linoleum-floored bedroom in a transient boarding house near the industrial district. She had no marble countertops. She had no catered galas. She had only the suffocating reality of her own reflection. My parents fared no better. First National Commercial Bank foreclosed on their sprawling stone estate after they failed to cover the predatory second mortgage. The equity they spent 30 years building evaporated overnight to cover the toxic debt Jessica had accumulated. They were forced to liquidate their remaining assets, selling their luxury vehicles and inherited jewelry just to avoid complete bankruptcy. I heard through a former corporate colleague that they relocated to a subsidized low-income housing complex in a decaying suburb far outside the city limits. They now spend their days in a tiny 2-bedroom unit, relying on fixed Social Security checks to buy groceries. The irony was profound. They had watched me face eviction and told me to fend for myself. Now they were packing their own cardboard boxes, facing the exact same terror they had dismissed in me. They gambled their entire future to protect a daughter who viewed them as collateral. The house always wins, and they had bet against the house. I did not revel in their misery. I simply acknowledged the balancing of the equation and returned to my work. It was a crisp Thursday morning when my driver pulled up to the Logan Square apartment complex. The lingering chill of the Chicago spring hung in the air, but the brutal winter that defined my eviction was long gone. I stepped out of the black sedan wearing a tailored beige trench coat, carrying a leather folio under my arm. I walked through the double glass doors of the lobby. The peeling paint and flickering fluorescent bulbs were already gone, replaced by modern fixtures and clean-primed walls. A crew of licensed contractors was busy installing new security systems. I bypassed the renovated management office and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. My heels clicked against the fresh industrial-grade carpeting we had installed over the weekend. I stopped in front of the exact unit I used to rent, the doorway where Gregory Harrison stood, and ordered his maintenance crew to throw my belongings into trash bags. I took a deep breath, feeling a profound shift in gravity. The space that once represented my darkest humiliation now served as the cornerstone of my corporate portfolio. I traced my finger over the brass unit number. I had survived the fire. Now I owned the furnace. I did not knock on my old door. I turned and walked down the hall to Unit 2B. I knocked gently on the weathered wood. A moment later, the door creaked open, stopped by a heavy brass chain lock. Mrs. Abernathy peered through the narrow gap. She clutched a knitted shawl tightly around her frail shoulders. She looked up at me with fearful, exhausted eyes, expecting another demand for arbitrary late fees or an aggressive threat of eviction. "Good morning, Mrs. Abernathy," I said, keeping my voice gentle and highly respectful. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Properties. We are the new management firm that recently acquired this building." The elderly woman hesitated, her trembling fingers reaching to unlatch the chain. She opened the door wider, her posture defensive. "I have the rent check," she stammered, her voice shaking with anxiety. "I just need one more day to deposit my Social Security check. Please, Mr. Harrison said he would throw me out if I was short again. I promise I will have the full amount by tomorrow morning. I held up a hand to stop her panic. You are not being thrown out, Mrs. Abernathy. Gregory Harrison is no longer associated with this property, and he will never return. I am here to personally deliver your new lease agreement. I opened my leather folio and handed her a crisp, professional document bearing the Apex Properties letterhead. She took the paper cautiously, her eyes scanning the bold print. She froze, reading the numbers printed clearly under the monthly rate section. This must be a typo, she whispered, looking up at me in sheer disbelief. This number is lower than what I pay now. It is significantly lower. It is not a typo, I clarified, offering a reassuring nod. I am implementing a portfolio-wide rent reduction of 15% for all existing tenants. The previous ownership artificially inflated the rates to cover personal liabilities and offshore debts. We are correcting the market value to reflect a fair, livable standard. Furthermore, a crew of union plumbers is currently in the basement installing 3 commercial-grade boilers. You will have reliable, consistent heating by this evening. Mrs. Abernathy stared at me, her mind struggling to process the sudden reversal of fortune. What about the late fees, she asked timidly. Mr. Harrison said I owed hundreds in penalties for missing the deadline. We are waiving all accumulated late fees applied during the previous administration, I stated firmly. The predatory charges have been wiped from your ledger. You have a completely clean slate. The elderly widow stared at the lease in her hands. A single tear broke free and rolled down her wrinkled cheek, dropping onto the pristine paper. She reached out and grasped my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with genuine, unbridled relief. You have no idea what this means. Thank you so much. I offered a warm, steady smile, returning her handshake. You are very welcome. Have a wonderful day, Mrs. Abernathy. I walked away from her door, continuing down the long corridor. I knocked on the next door, and then the next. I spent the entire afternoon walking the halls of the building that had once chewed me up and spit me out. I handed out new leases. I authorized critical structural repairs. I dispatched exterminators and electricians. I watched the profound physical weight of predatory housing lift off the shoulders of dozens of hardworking people. Venture capitalists operate under the assumption that real estate is just a spreadsheet of yielding assets and acceptable losses. They believe corporate power is defined by how much wealth you can extract from the vulnerable. I learned a very different lesson during my time in that freezing basement. True power is not just the ability to destroy an enemy. True power is acquiring the financial leverage to rewrite the rules of the game entirely. I stepped out of the building and back onto the Chicago pavement. The late afternoon sun broke through the gray clouds, casting a bright, clear light over the Logan Square neighborhood. I looked up at the brick facade of the complex. My complex. My empire. A few months ago, a ruthless landlord and a toxic family threw me out onto this exact sidewalk because they calculated my net worth and decided I was a liability. They thought I was a disposable asset. They thought I would quietly fade into the background, accept my defeat, and assume my place at the bottom of the food chain. They made a fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. They threw me out on the street because they thought I had no value. In the end, I bought the street. I sit behind my granite desk at Apex Properties, watching the Chicago skyline shift from dusk to a glittering grid of lights. The flimsy cardboard box I carried out of my old firm is long gone, replaced by a real estate portfolio worth tens of millions. People occasionally ask me if the isolation of cutting off my entire biological family feels heavy. The truth is, the silence they left behind remains the most expensive, comforting luxury I own. I did not just survive a predatory eviction and a deep familial betrayal. I weaponized them. Looking back at that freezing stairwell and those fraudulent basement ledgers, I carry 3 unshakable truths forward. First, biological alignment is never a substitute for human decency. Society conditions us to tolerate toxic relatives simply because we share DNA, treating family ties like an unpayable debt. They are not. Loyalty must be earned through actions, not inherited through blood. When my parents and sister demanded my financial ruin to fund their superficial illusions, they forfeited their titles. Cutting them off was not an act of cruelty. It was a surgical amputation required to save my own life. Second, real leverage is always built in the dark. Gregory Harrison and my sister both failed because they confused arrogance with actual power. They broadcasted their malice, assuming my quiet demeanor was a symptom of weakness. Never correct an enemy who is actively underestimating you. Let them believe they hold all the winning cards while you quietly buy the casino. The most lethal moves in business and in life do not require shouting or empty threats. They require hard data, perfect timing, and the discipline to strike only when the trap is irrevocably locked. Finally, ultimate retaliation is never about matching your abuser's cruelty. If my only goal had been to ruin Gregory and Jessica, I would be no different than them, just another parasite operating within a broken system. The highest form of victory is seizing the power they used to crush you and rewriting the rules of the game entirely. Fixing the building's boilers, lowering the rent, and shielding those vulnerable tenants prove that you can conquer the corporate food chain without shedding your humanity. You never have to accept the narrative your abusers attempt to write for you. You possess the intellect and the sovereign right to draft your own closing chapter. If you found value in my journey from a discarded tenant to a chief executive, share your perspective in the comments. Have you ever had to sever toxic blood ties to protect your own future? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single one. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video here on Hazel Tells Stories. Until next time, remember, when they try to push you out into the cold, build your own fire.